Has this ever happened to you, where a man who once seemed indifferent now cannot stop circling back, haunted by the very silence he once took for granted? It begins in stillness, not rage, not revenge, but the kind of sacred quiet that rattles the ego. A woman turns, not with a storm, but with a calm, so profound it shatters the illusion of control. She doesn't run, she doesn't scream, she simply walks slowly. And in that slowness, something ancient is triggered in the male psyche, the recognition of a force he cannot own. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the deep feminine presence living inside every man. Most men do not know her, most run from her. But when she appears in a living woman not as seduction, but as sovereignty, the man is left undone. Because what she mirrors is not just beauty, but the part of himself he has long rejected. You see, the woman who walks away slowly is not playing a game. She has already faced the battlefield within the grief, the abandonment wounds, the hungry need to be chosen. And she has chosen herself. Not in bitterness, but in wisdom. Not because she doesn't feel, but because she finally knows how to hold what she feels without needing to bleed it out to be seen. This is the kind of woman men crave but cannot explain. She is not the loudest. She is not the one who clings. She's the one who was present fully, wildly, vulnerably until she wasn't. The one who gave chances, not out of weakness, but out of belief, until she saw that belief was costing her soul. When a woman withdraws her presence not out of vengeance, but reverence, the air shifts. Her absence speaks in ways her words never could. And the man, still bound by his own ego projections, does not know what to make of this sudden vacancy. His shadow stirs. His illusions fracture. What he once dismissed now becomes precious. What he once controlled now feels out of reach. This is the forbidden truth. Men are drawn not to women who chase, but to women who have done their inner work and refuse to abandon themselves again. A woman in her wholeness who sees him, yet refuses to lose herself in him, becomes a mirror he cannot look away from. He begins to remember her in fragments, the way she looked at him without armor, the silence between her sighs, the way she once reached for him not out of fear, but out of fullness. And then the moment it changed, when she stopped explaining, when she stopped asking, when she simply stood, gathered the pieces of her devotion, and began to walk. Slowly, deliberately, with the kind of grace only those who have suffered understand. It's not just the woman he's chasing. It's the part of himself that was once reflected in her gaze. The permission to feel. The invitation to descend beneath the ego into the underworld of the soul. But most men are not ready. And yet, they crave her. Because somewhere deep within, they know she was the door. Jung teaches that we do not become whole by chasing the light, but by making the darkness conscious. The woman who walks away slowly has met that darkness. She no longer fears being alone, because she has already faced the terror of not being seen even while being touched. She knows the difference between being desired and being cherished. And she would rather sit in silence than beg again to be chosen by a man who cannot meet her depth. This is what makes her unforgettable, not because she punished him, but because she didn't. She didn't try to convince him. She didn't beg for closure. She left with the kind of softness that hurts more than rage, a silence that echoes louder than words, a walk that says, I loved you, but I love me more. And that kind of woman lingers. She becomes the ghost in his thoughts, the one who saw him, all of him, and still offered herself. And he, blinded by ego or fear, did not recognize the sacredness of that offering until it was gone. But she didn't leave to teach him a lesson. She left because she finally learned her own. She learned that love without self-respect is sacrifice, not devotion. That holding space for a man's potential is not the same as being held. That being available does not mean being valued. And so she began the long, slow departure, not with drama, but with dignity. To the unawakened man, her departure feels like a betrayal. But that's only because he mistook her presence for permanence. He thought her softness meant she would stay no matter how cold he became. But the truth is, she wasn't weak, she was patient. Patient enough to hope he'd rise, patient enough to believe he could meet her in the sacred middle, but even the sacred has its boundaries. And once they're crossed, the feminine retreats, not out of punishment, but preservation. In Jungian terms, she has individuated. She has stepped out of the anima projection, no longer a muse for his unconscious desires or a container for his unmet mother wounds. She has become a full archetype in her own right, the sovereign woman. Neither manipulative nor needy, not demanding, but discerning. A force that doesn't scream but simply ceases to be where she is no longer honored. And this cessation of energy, this energetic withdrawal, is what undoes the man. Because for the first time, he is left with his own emptiness. No more reflection, no more soothing, no more feminine balm for his hidden grief. The silence forces him to see himself unfiltered, unmirrored, and the pain of that is often unbearable. That's why so many men return, not because they suddenly love her better, but because they cannot tolerate the mirror being gone. They crave her because she held what they repressed. She touched the parts they disowned, and now, without her, they are haunted by their own shadows. But the woman who walks away slowly does not return easily. She has stepped into the sacred feminine, not the passive lover, but the high priestess. She no longer feeds from external approval. Her validation is internal. Her compass is truth. And her truth says, if I must shrink to stay, then I must leave to expand. Still, she carries tenderness in her bones. She remembers the moments of realness, the glimmers of love between the masks. She does not demonize him. She knows he is broken in places she cannot fix. She sees his inner boy, terrified of vulnerability, addicted to control. But she also knows this. It is not her work to raise a man's emotional intelligence at the cost of her own spirit. So she walks not away from him, but toward herself. And as she walks, slowly, he watches. The stoic mask begins to falter. The ego shakes. For perhaps the first time, he feels the weight of what he's lost. Not a woman, but this woman. The one who saw into him. The one who touched his hidden soul and loved him there. The one who asked for nothing more than presence. And when even that was denied, she didn't beg, she bowed out. This is not manipulation. This is metamorphosis. It is what happens when a woman stops leaking her energy into empty vessels and begins pouring it into her own becoming. And oh, how men feel that absence. Carl Jung reminds us that what we repress does not disappear. It returns in dreams, in obsession, in fantasy, in regret. And so she returns to him, not in reality, but in the endless loop of what if. He scrolls through old messages. He replays her laughter. He wonders if she ever truly loved him. And the cruel irony is she did, more deeply than he knew how to receive. But she is no longer the same. The woman who walks away slowly is not the woman he met. She has died 100 small deaths to reach this version of herself. She has wept in private, screamed into pillows, written letters she never sent, and in that process, she has alchemized her pain into power. Now, her absence is her presence. Her silence is her message. Her walking away is not an ending, but a beginning. In the world of archetypes, she is no longer the maiden who waits, but the wise woman who walks. She holds the torch of self-awareness, lighting the way for her own rebirth. And this is what men feel, even if they don't know how to name it. They feel the fire she now carries, not the fire of anger, but the fire of clarity, of knowing. And there is nothing more magnetic or more dangerous than a woman who knows. Men crave her because she no longer craves them, because in her departure, she has unhooked herself from the fantasy that he will one day become the man she imagined. She no longer argues with reality. She meets it and moves. This woman no longer needs to be understood by him. She has understood herself. She has seen her own tendency to overgive, to fix, to rescue. And she has stopped. Not because she doesn't care, but because she has learned the cost. And that cost was her joy, her softness, her time, her magic. So now, she preserves her magic. She gives where she is received. She listens to her own intuition, not his excuses. And that shift, subtle as it is, becomes seismic in its impact. Because men are not drawn to a woman who is always available. They are drawn to the one who is selective, the one who honors herself enough to say no, not in punishment, but in protection. Carl Jung would say she has stepped out of the collective feminine wound, the wound of pleasing, of performing, of proving her worth through how much she endures. She no longer needs to earn love by staying. She realizes now that love must meet her where she stands, not where she bends. And the tragedy for many men is that they only awaken after the loss. The same woman they once dismissed as too sensitive or too much suddenly becomes the echo they can't silence. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She saw him, and now she's gone. This is the slow haunt of the feminine. She leaves behind more than memories. She leaves behind an energetic void, a space that once held warmth, now cold, a presence that once soothed, now silent. And in that silence, the man meets himself. His wounds, his projections, his shadows, the parts he blamed her for now return to him for reckoning. But this is her gift. The woman who walks away slowly gives him back to himself. She withdraws not to punish, but to restore balance. And if he is wise, if he is willing, he will use that space not to chase her shadow, but to confront his own. Still, she does not wait. Her path is no longer shaped by his awakening. She has her own journey, her own becoming. And along that path, she is met by other men, not just romantically, but spiritually. Men who have done the work. Men who no longer fear the depth of the feminine. Men who do not flinch at truth. But even then, she is not waiting for one of them to save her. She has become her own sanctuary, her own validation, her own mirror. She now walks with the weightlessness of someone who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. Her energy is no longer scattered. It is sacred. And that is what makes her unforgettable. Because in a world where everyone is rushing, she moves slowly. In a culture that teaches women to chase, she walks away. In a sea of noise, she becomes the silence that lingers. And her walk is not just physical. It is energetic, emotional, spiritual, every step a reclaiming of self, every pause a prayer to her own wholeness. And somewhere behind her, the man watches. He remembers the way she once smiled at him with eyes full of belief. He recalls the softness of her voice when she said she loved him. He replays the moment she turned not with hate, not with haste, but with the quiet resolve of a woman who had finally seen enough. And he realizes she didn't need to slam the door to be gone. She only needed to walk slowly. And in that slowness, she offered him something rare, the opportunity to feel what he had numbed, the space to witness the consequences of spiritual laziness. The mirror of everything he was too distracted, too proud, too afraid to feel. He is left with the sound of her absence, and in that silence, he hears his own hollowness echo back, not because she cursed him, but because she blessed him by no longer carrying what was never hers to hold. This woman, the one who walks away slowly, embodies something primal. She stirs the archetypal memory of the high priestess and the untamed oracle, the feminine that cannot be bought, cannot be owned, only met. She moves not with rebellion, but with reverence. Not toward another man, but toward deeper meaning. She is what Carl Jung might call the transcendent function in living form, the psychic force that bridges what is conscious and what is buried in the dark. She does not just leave a man, she forces him to confront what he's avoided in himself. She is not the destroyer, she is the revealer. And many men cannot handle this, because to see her leave without rage is unbearable. Anger they understand. But calm detachment reveals their irrelevance. And nothing terrifies the fragile ego more than becoming irrelevant to a woman who once saw them as everything. You see, when a woman detaches with love still in her eyes, it pierces deeper than hate, because hate still implies investment. But indifference, real soulful indifference, is fatal to illusion. She doesn't need to scream to be heard. Her refusal to engage is her power. Her disinterest is her freedom. And her slowness? That's her final grace. A ritual of release. A goodbye offered with dignity. The man, in time, might try to return. Many do. They text late at night. They call under the illusion of closure. But the truth is, they're chasing a woman who no longer exists. The one they once knew has evolved. She has stepped beyond the threshold of need. And now, the chase is empty. Because it's not her they want. It's the reflection of themselves they once saw in her light. but she no longer reflects what is not her responsibility. She is not here to mother him, to soothe his guilt, to entertain his regret. She is here now to protect her peace, to cultivate her depth, to nourish her wild. And still she loves. She is love. But her love is no longer for sale to the emotionally unavailable, the chronically confused, or the spiritually asleep. Her love is sacred. Her time is gold. Her silence is scripture. Jung understood this kind of woman, the one who no longer needs to explain her leaving. He saw that individuation, the true journey of the soul, the man's sacrifice. And often, that sacrifice is being misunderstood by those who are not ready for the truth she lives. She will be called cold, too much, aloof, selfish, but those labels are only projections, attempts by lesser minds to name what they cannot possess. In truth, she is warmth incarnate, but only to those who can hold it without burning it down. To walk away slowly is not a tactic. It is the final movement of a woman who once danced in hope and now dances in freedom. She walks with grace, with sorrow, with memories, but she does not turn back. Not because she hates him, but because she finally loves herself enough not to settle for less than soul. And that is what men crave, whether they know it or not. They crave the woman who will not barter with her own worth, the one who will not trade her silence for temporary affection, the one who will walk away slowly, yes, but never return to the place where her spirit was dimmed. Because that kind of woman is not just desired, she is remembered. She becomes the story, the lesson, the muse, and the warning. The woman who showed them what it looks like to leave without fear, to walk with open eyes and a closed heart, not because she is numb, but because she is finally healed. In every myth, there's a moment when the goddess disappears, not into oblivion, but into herself. Psyche, Persephone, Lilith, all walked away. Not for vengeance, but to reclaim what had been scattered. The woman who walks away slowly is part of this lineage, a spiritual exile not from love, but from illusion. Her absence, then, is not just absence. It is ritual, a severing of soul ties spun from imbalance. It is her refusal to carry a man's destiny while he avoids his own reflection. She no longer sings to sleeping kings. She lets them sleep. And what terrifies the ego most is that she walks away without closing the door. She leaves it open not for him, but for truth. Because she knows if he ever returns, it will not be to the same version of her. The version he once knew, the accommodating, over-explaining, heart-on-her-sleeve version, has been buried, not out of bitterness, but out of birth. She has been reborn through fire. And from that fire comes something untouchable. A woman who no longer reacts but observes, no longer performs but embodies, no longer begs but blesses herself with distance. She may still love him. Love doesn't vanish, but that love is no longer hungry. It has been fed by grief, tempered by solitude, reshaped by reflection. It is no longer the kind of love that clings. It is the kind that releases. And in that release, she becomes more powerful than ever. He feels it, even miles away. The energetic pull shifts. What was once predictable becomes mysterious. What was once accessible becomes sacred. He tries to summon her with old patterns, breadcrumb messages, nostalgic appeals, casual apologies. But the woman who walks away slowly doesn't answer breadcrumbs with banquets. She answers with silence. Not the cold kind, the holy kind. Because now she's in communion with something far greater than his validation. She is dancing with her archetypal self, with the divine feminine that no longer fears being alone. She has tasted her own wholeness, and no man, no matter how magnetic, can tempt her into fragmentation again. This is the cost of awakening. To be misunderstood, to be labeled unavailable by those who once emotionally starved her, to be called distant by men who never learned to listen, to walk alone at times, not because she's unlovable, but because she refuses to betray her inner voice for companionship. Jung warned us, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. She has met herself now, not as a reflection in his eyes, but as an embodiment of her own essence. And that essence is unshakable. So when he thinks of her, and he will, it won't just be her body he remembers. It will be her presence, her intuition, the way she knew things without words, the way she held space without needing to be held in return, the way she made him feel seen even when he was hiding. And then, the moment that gaze softened, turned inward, and left him standing in his own shadow. For the woman who walks away slowly is not punishing him. She is fulfilling her contract with herself. A soul contract written in moments of silence, breathwork, rage, and release. She has come back to herself, and in doing so, she has exited the karmic cycle of proving her worth. And to the man who watches her leave, know this: she did love you. She loved you fiercely, but loving you could not come at the expense of loving herself. And so she had to walk even with trembling legs, even with wet cheeks she had to walk. Because the feminine, when awakened, no longer waits. She walks not with hope, but with truth, not toward fantasy, but into her own becoming. And in that journey, she no longer carries those unwilling to carry themselves. Still, in the quiet moments, she may think of him, of the potential, of the shared laughter, of what could have been. But she will not return. She has become too sacred to offer herself again where she was not honored the first time. She has become a temple now, not a threshold for someone else's transformation, but a sanctuary of her own. And temples do not move. They do not chase pilgrims. They wait in stillness, radiating presence, offering grace only to those who enter in reverence. Men crave this kind of woman not because she gives them what they want, but because she forces them to feel what they lack. Her absence is not just emptiness, it is an invitation. An ache that awakens the sleeping masculine. She does not demand he change. She leaves, and in doing so, she creates the possibility for it. But here lies the paradox. She does not leave in order to be missed. She does not walk away for attention. She walks away because she has finally understood that her energy, her essence, her devotion, they are sacred currencies. And where there is no mutual exchange, there must be a retreat. She becomes the embodiment of what Jung called the numinous feminine, not just soft and nurturing, but also fierce and unyielding in her self-worth. She no longer confuses attachment with love. She no longer confuses longing with destiny. She sees clearly now, not every bond is meant to be bound. And so, with every step away, she returns deeper into herself, into her rituals, into her breath, into her body, into the kind of inner peace that no man can provide and no absence can threaten. She stops looking back, not out of cruelty, but because she knows the danger of nostalgia, how it paints the past with colors that never truly existed. She chooses presence. Not the promise of potential, but the truth of what is. And if he comes back, one day having faced his own depths, she will see, she will feel, she will discern. Not with the eyes of a woman still waiting, but with the eyes of a woman who has already arrived. For by then, her world will have changed. Not externally, not in the lover, the house, or the story, but internally. She will have built altars where her self-doubt once lived. She will have lit candles for the girl she once was, the one who begged, who chased, who over-explained. And she will weep, not for the man, but for the many times she abandoned herself in the name of love. No more. The woman who walks away slowly is not ice. She is fire held in stillness. She feels everything, but she has mastered the art of feeling without collapsing, of longing without losing herself, of grieving without reopening the door to what cannot hold her. This is what breaks the masculine illusion, the belief that he could always come back, that her heart was a revolving door. It is not. It is a sacred gate guarded by discernment. And once it closes, it is not anger that keeps him out. It is alignment. She is not angry. She is awake. So when he whispers her name in the darkness, when he thinks of her lips, her eyes, her voice led him, that is his medicine. That is the echo of her soul doing what his silence never did, speaking, but she is no longer listening. Not out of spite, but because her ears are now tuned to higher frequencies. She is listening to her calling, to her purpose, to the voice that rises inside her when she walks in nature, alone but never lonely. She hears the sound of her own steps, steady, sovereign, and it soothes her far more than any breadcrumb of affection ever could. The man who once had her will try to understand what happened. He may even try to mimic her strength, her mystery, her grace, but he cannot replicate what he refused to meet. He cannot embody what he avoided. Because power like hers is not a performance, it is the fruit of shadow work, heartbreak, healing, and becoming. And that becoming is a quiet revolution. She does not announce her freedom, she does not post her glow up, she simply is. The kind of woman who sits in silence with a candle and feels more alive than she ever did trying to earn a place in someone else's world. She does not hope he regrets it. She hopes he heals. But either way, she will not look back. Because looking back would dishonor the woman. She has become the woman who rose from the ashes of almost love, who gathered the shards of her scattered self and forged them into something unshakable. She is not the exception. She is the evolution. The embodiment of feminine detachment, not the cold shutdown born of trauma, but the warm release that comes from radical self-trust. She no longer confuses presence with proof. She no longer needs to be chosen to feel valuable. She knows she is valuable, and that knowing is now her compass. What a man craves in her is not her beauty, it's the emotional power she holds in silence. It's the sacred restraint, the way she can love without begging, care without clinging, desire without degrading her dignity. He may not even know how to name it, but he will feel it in the pit of his stomach when he sees her name, in the quiet envy when another man truly meets her, in the weight of his own unspoken longing. And it will dawn on him, she was never just a woman. She was a mirror that showed him his potential and his fear, his truth and his avoidance, his capacity to connect and his terror of surrender. In her presence, he was invited to rise. In her absence, he is left to reckon. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." She made her unconscious conscious. She met her wounds, her patterns, her inner child not to be lovable, but to be whole. She left the relationship not because she stopped loving him, but because she started loving herself more precisely. And now she walks, not away from him, but into the life that was always waiting, the one she couldn't see, while pouring her light into his void. She moves with purpose, with softness, with sacred disinterest in anyone who doesn't see her as the spiritual force that she is. Men will always crave the woman who walks away slowly, because she is not fleeing, she is freeing herself. And when you are free, truly free, you become magnetic in a way that no words can imitate. She does not perform attraction, she is attraction, not for the wounded, but for the awakened. So let him wonder, let him ache, let him remember, not because she desires to haunt him, but because she refuses to haunt herself ever again with memories of who she had to become just to be tolerated. She no longer tolerates. She attracts what is aligned, what is ready, what is willing. And until that arrives, she walks, slowly, powerfully, without apology. And in that walk, she reclaims every part of herself that she once gave away too easily, every tear that was dismissed, every intuition she silenced. Every moment she begged for clarity from a man who couldn't even give it to himself. No more begging, no more bleeding for love, only choosing, because in the end, this is the deepest truth. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.